Some people spend their whole lives building walls to keep certain people out. My mother-in-law, Chelsea Turner, spent 11 years building hers specifically to keep me out. Brick by brick, sneer by sneer, holiday dinner by holiday dinner. She was meticulous about it. Almost artistic, really. The woman had a gift. She just never considered what would happen when the person she'd locked out turned out to hold the keys. Welcome back to Dad's Sweet Revenge. Doc, grab your snacks. Get comfortable, and remember, every villain in these stories thought they were the smartest person in the room. They were not. Subscribe so you never miss a story. My name is Eric Sullivan. I'm 36 years old, and I've been a licensed diesel mechanic for going on 12 years. I own a small repair shop on the east side of Denver, Sullivan Auto and Fleet. 6 bays, 4 employees, and more business than I can honestly handle on most weeks. It's not glamorous. My hands are never entirely clean. My work shirts cost less than the napkins at the restaurants my in-laws prefer. And for 11 years, none of that mattered to Chelsea and Harold Turner, because the only thing they ever saw when they looked at me was a man who wasn't good enough for their daughter. Megan was 23 when we met. I was 23 too. She'd been at a coffee shop on Colfax with a textbook propped open, and a look on her face, like the textbook had personally offended her. I'd asked what she was studying. She'd said finance. I'd said I balanced my own books. She'd laughed like that was the funniest thing she'd heard all week. We were married 2 years later. Chelsea cried at the wedding. It wasn't out of joy. Harold, that's her father, silver-haired, the kind of man who wears blazers to his own backyard. Harold had shaken my hand at the reception with the energy of a man completing an unpleasant transaction. Take care of her, he'd said. It felt less like a congratulation and more like a warning. I had taken care of her. 11 years, 2 miscarriages, and 1 beautiful son named Trevor, now 8 years old, and currently obsessed with dinosaurs and asking questions I don't have answers to. Megan had gone on to become a financial analyst at a mid-size firm downtown. I'd grown the shop from 2 bays to 6. We owned our home in Aurora. We were, by any reasonable measure, doing fine. None of it moved the needle with Chelsea. I just don't understand why she settled, Chelsea had said once, loudly at Thanksgiving, while I was in the next room. She hadn't lowered her voice. I don't think she'd wanted to. She had options. I've always remembered the exact feeling of setting my fork down very carefully that day and staring at the wall for 10 solid seconds. Megan had squeezed my hand under the table. Ignore her, she'd whispered. I had ignored her. For 11 years, I'd ignored her with the discipline of a man who understood that reacting was exactly what Chelsea wanted. She wanted me to blow up. She wanted me to prove her right. She wanted some evidence that the lowlife she'd always believed me to be was lurking just beneath the surface of the passably polite man who showed up to her dinner parties and said please and thank you, and complimented her cooking even when it didn't deserve it. I never gave her that. What I didn't know, what I absolutely could not have known on the morning of Saturday, March 9th, was that I wasn't going to need to blow up at all. Life was going to do it for me. The dinner had been Megan's idea. Chelsea had chosen the location, naturally, a place called Carmine's in Cherry Creek, the kind of restaurant where the menu doesn't list prices, because if you have to ask, you've already answered a question about yourself. The occasion was Harold's 61st birthday. Megan had insisted we go. I'd agreed, because I loved my wife, and I was, if nothing else, a man who showed up. Just be yourself, Megan had told me that morning, fixing Trevor's collar in the hallway mirror. Being myself is the problem, I'd said. She'd smiled, but hadn't argued. I'd left the house at 4:30 in the afternoon for a 6 o'clock reservation, 45 minutes of cushion, plenty of time to take I-25 down, park, and walk in looking like a man who had his life together. I'd even ironed the blue button-down Megan had bought me for Christmas. I made it maybe 4 miles before I saw her. She was pulled over on the shoulder of South Colorado Boulevard, a 1967 Pontiac Firebird in a shade of burgundy that somebody had clearly spent real money restoring. It was sitting at a dead tilt, with the right front corner dropped toward the asphalt. Flat tire. A woman stood beside it, maybe 70 years old, short white hair, dressed in the kind of clothes that said she hadn't planned on spending her Saturday afternoon on the side of a Denver boulevard. She had her phone out, jabbing at it with the expression of someone who had not kept up with the evolution of roadside assistance apps. I pulled over before I'd consciously decided to. I know how that sounds. I know the story I was driving to, the dinner I'd already been dreading, the mother-in-law who'd spent a decade cataloging my shortcomings. I know all of it. But there was a 70-year-old woman standing next to a tire that wasn't going to change itself. And I was a mechanic, and I pulled over. "Need a hand?" I called out, getting down from the truck. She looked up, and there was a half-second where she evaluated me the way older women sometimes evaluate men who stop on roadsides. Then something in my face, or my voice, or maybe just the situation resolved itself for her, and she nodded. "Spares in the trunk," she said. "I know how to change a tire. I just can't." She gestured at the lug nuts with a grimace. "My hands. Arthritis." I could see it now in the way she held the phone, the slight curl of her fingers. "I've got it," I said. "Give me 10 minutes. Her name was Catherine. She told me that while I was pulling the jack from her trunk, making conversation the way you do. She was on her way to a meeting, she said. An important one. She'd had this car for 40 years, and she knew everything about it. And the one thing she hadn't accounted for was a nail on Colorado Boulevard on a Saturday afternoon. "What kind of work do you do?" she asked me while I worked. "Mechanic," I said. "Own a shop on the east side." She watched me crack the lug nuts with the breaker bar. "You're good at that." 11 years of practice. While I worked, she talked. She wasn't just filling silence. She was deliberate about it. She asked about the shop, about how long I'd been in Denver, about whether I liked the work. I answered honestly, the way I always did, because I'd learned early that pretending to be something I wasn't was exhausting and ultimately pointless. By the time I had the spare on, and the flat in her trunk, and the lug nuts torqued down, I always torqued them properly. Anything worth doing is worth doing right. 22 minutes had passed. I stood up, wiped my hands on the rag I kept in the truck, and looked at myself. Both knees of my slacks had road grime on them. My right sleeve had a streak of grease just below the elbow that I hadn't noticed happening. The ironed blue button down was no longer making the argument it had been making when I left the house. Catherine was watching me. "You're going somewhere," she noted. "Dinner," I said. "I'm already late." She tilted her head. "With your wife's family?" I must have made a face, because she smiled slightly. "That bad?" "They have opinions," I said. "About me." Specifically, she was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into the small purse she'd been carrying over her shoulder and produced a business card. She held it out. I took it. "Catherine Moore. Moore Capital Group. Senior Managing Partner." I looked up at her. "Call my office on Monday," she said. "I want to hear more about your shop." I opened my mouth, then closed it. "Ma'am, I didn't stop because I know why you stopped," she said. "That's exactly why I want to hear about your shop." She got back into the Firebird. The engine turned over on the first try, because of course it did. It was a '67 Pontiac that someone had loved properly for 40 years. She pulled out onto Colorado Boulevard and was gone. I stood there on the shoulder with a business card in my greasy hand. Already 22 minutes late for a dinner I hadn't wanted to attend in the first place. I didn't know what Catherine Moore was. Not yet. I didn't know what that card meant, or what Monday morning would bring, or how thoroughly and completely the universe was about to rearrange itself around the decision I'd made to pull over. I just got back in my truck and drove to Cherry Creek. Carmine's had the kind of entrance that made you feel prejudged. Dark wood, low lighting. A host who looked at my grease-streaked sleeve with the controlled professional neutrality of someone paid specifically not to react. Chelsea reacted. She was already at the table with Harold, Megan, and Megan's sister Haley when I walked in. Chelsea was 58, impeccably dressed, with the kind of posture that comes from decades of considering herself above her surroundings. She looked at me, at my knees, at my sleeve, at my hair which had apparently suffered during the tire change, and her expression cycled through a dozen unspoken calculations in a heartbeat. "Eric," her voice was the temperature of the Coors Banquet. I would have preferred to be drinking somewhere else entirely. "Sorry I'm late," I said, taking the empty seat beside Megan. There was a woman broken down on Colorado Boulevard. She knew me too well to ask questions. "You stopped," Megan said. She was about 70 years old and had a flat tire. Harold said nothing. He was studying his menu with great focus. You couldn't have called roadside assistance? Chelsea asked. She was using the measured tone she used when she was saying one thing and meaning something much larger and more comprehensive. She didn't know how to use the app, I said. And I'm a mechanic, so yes, Chelsea said. You are. Haley, Megan's younger sister, 29, who had the grace to be mostly kind to me, and the habit of going quiet whenever her mother started in, picked up her water glass and studied it with sudden intense interest. Harold cleared his throat. Happy birthday to me, he said, without particular humor. Dinner progressed the way these dinners always progressed. Chelsea steered the conversation to topics that either excluded me or subtly illuminated my deficiencies. Harold spoke about his commercial real estate holdings in the way men speak about things they expect to impress people. Megan held my hand under the table periodically and shot me looks that said I'm sorry and thank you for not saying what I know you're thinking. Jasmine and Reynolds were asking about you, Harold, Chelsea said, midway through the entrées. She said it casually, but there was an undercurrent of something in her voice I couldn't identify. Jasmine said Catherine Moore pushed the meeting back again. Harold's fork paused for just a half second. We'll reschedule. That's the third time. I'm aware, Chelsea. I filed this away without knowing why. The name sat in the back of my head. Catherine Moore. Just slightly out of arm's reach of whatever else I was thinking. Then the door opened. I didn't notice it at first. I was looking at Harold, watching him deflect his wife with the practiced ease of a man who'd been doing it for decades. Then I heard the host's voice, and something in its tone. The slight elevation of deference that never happened for regular patrons made me look up. Catherine Moore walked into Carmine's restaurant in Cherry Creek, Denver, Colorado, at 7:43 on the evening of Saturday, March 9th. She had changed out of the roadside clothes. She was wearing something dark and elegant now, the kind of thing that cost more than most people's car payments. She was moving through the restaurant with two other people, a woman I didn't recognize, and a man in his 50s with the careful, watchful look of a lawyer. And she was heading directly toward our table. I didn't breathe. Harold saw her at the same moment his wife did. His face did something complicated. Chelsea straightened in her chair. Haley looked confused. Megan leaned toward me and whispered, "Do you know who that?" "Yes," I said. Catherine stopped at our table. She looked at Harold. She looked at Chelsea. And then she looked at me, still in the grease-streaked blue button-down, having had no opportunity to change, and her face did something warm and specific. "This is the young man I told you about," she said. To no one in particular, and everyone simultaneously. Harold Turner went very still. I should explain who Catherine Moore was, because I had looked her up in the parking lot before I came in. In the 11 minutes between receiving her card and pulling into Cherry Creek, I had Googled her name with one hand on the wheel, like a man who had just been handed a grenade and wasn't sure if the pin was in or out. Moore Capital Group was a Denver-based private investment firm, founded in 1987. Its current portfolio value was roughly $480 million. That was the number that had made me set my phone down in the parking lot and sit in silence for half a minute. Catherine Moore had, over the course of 37 years, built one of the most significant commercial investment portfolios in the Rocky Mountain region. Harold Turner's commercial real estate company had been seeking a capital infusion from Moore Capital Group for 8 months. Megan had mentioned it obliquely once. The way she mentioned things she knew I'd find ironic. I hadn't understood the scale of it at the time. The ask was $40 million. Catherine had said no twice. It wasn't a permanent rejection, just a not yet, which in the language of private capital means prove something to me. She had been on her way to an informal meeting when I found her on Colorado Boulevard. A meeting with Harold's representatives, a preliminary discussion that, by all accounts, Harold Turner desperately needed to go well, and she had pulled into the valet at Carmine's instead, because she'd recognized the neighborhood, or because fate has a particular sense of humor, or because, and I believe this one, Catherine Moore was exactly the kind of woman who followed her instincts, and her instincts had led her here. The silence at that table lasted maybe 4 seconds. It felt geological. Chelsea recovered first, because Chelsea always recovered first. "Catherine, how wonderful I'll be direct," Catherine said. She wasn't rude about it. She was simply a woman who'd spent 4 decades saying exactly what she meant. "Harold, your firm approached mine in July of last year. You've been seeking capital for the Meridian development. 40 million, 5-year horizon, equity stake. Harold nodded slowly. That's correct. I declined twice. She pulled out the chair next to me, the empty one that had presumably been reserved for no one, and sat in it. She didn't wait to be invited. It was available, so she took it. The man and woman she'd come in with stationed themselves just slightly behind her. I want to tell you why I declined. Harold's jaw was tight. Catherine, this really isn't. It's a dinner. I've interrupted dinners before. She looked at Chelsea briefly. Then she looked at me again, and something in her expression was both settled and purposeful, like a woman executing a plan she'd made in the car on the way over. I declined, because in my experience, the character of the people leading a project tells you more than any prospectus. I've funded projects with weaker financials and better people. I've passed on beautiful financials with people I didn't trust. That's very wise, Chelsea said carefully, watching Catherine the way a person watches a conversation they're desperate to steer. When I was on the side of Colorado Boulevard this afternoon, Catherine said, with a flat tire and a phone I couldn't operate, wondering if I was going to miss my meeting entirely. She paused. Your son-in-law stopped. Didn't call ahead. Didn't calculate whether it was worth his time. Just got out of his truck and fixed it. Wouldn't take any money. Told me he was a mechanic and that it was what he did. The table was completely still. He was on his way here, she continued. To celebrate your birthday, Harold. He showed up late, and he showed up dirty, and he showed up anyway. Because that's who he is. Chelsea's face had gone completely blank. The contempt was gone, replaced by pure uncertainty. She looked like a woman trying to access a locked file and finding the directory had been completely reorganized without her consent. I'm telling you this, Catherine said, because I've spent 8 months wondering what kind of organization the Turner Group actually is, and today I got my answer. Not from your prospectus, not from your meetings. She looked at me, and there was something in her expression that I recognized as the look of someone who'd made a decision and was entirely comfortable with it. From him. She stood. My office will be in touch Monday morning, she said to Harold. I'll want Eric involved in the due diligence process, as my liaison. Harold opened his mouth, closed it. I'm sorry, Chelsea said. The words came out thin. He understands practical operations, Catherine said simply. I've watched enough executives who couldn't change their own tire and didn't think it mattered. I like people who know how things actually work. She looked at me one more time. Monday, 9 a.m. Then, she was moving again. The way she'd arrived, deliberately, in a direction she'd chosen, without waiting for the room to catch up. She and her 2 associates were seated at a corner table before anyone at ours managed a full sentence. The silence that followed was different from all the previous silences I'd weathered at Turner family dinners over 11 years. It wasn't the silence of contempt or the silence of tolerant discomfort. It was the silence of an entire architecture, collapsing very slowly and with great precision. Haley picked up her wine and took a long sip, and did not look at her mother. Megan was looking at me. Her eyes were doing several things at once. Harold was staring at the table. His jaw was working slightly, like a man chewing on something that had no good texture. Chelsea was looking at the corner where Catherine Moore had been seated. Then she looked at my grease-streaked sleeve. Then she looked at Harold. The geometry of that sequence, what it mapped to, what it meant about the last 11 years and everything she'd said, and everything she'd implied. That geometry was working itself out across her face in real time, and it was not a comfortable process to watch. Well, Harold said finally. That was all he said for a while. Her firm has $480 million in assets, I said, because I felt like the information was relevant. I looked it up in the parking lot. Chelsea turned to look at me. Something in her expression was raw in a way I hadn't seen before. Eric, you said I was a lowlife, I said, quietly without heat, just placing the word on the table like a document. At Thanksgiving 4 years ago. Through the wall. You didn't know I could hear you. But I could. She opened her mouth. You said Megan settled, I said. You said it at Christmas too, and at Trevor's birthday party, to Aunt Diane, while I was getting Trevor's cake from the car. Megan had gone very still beside me. I never said anything, I said. Because I love my wife, and I didn't want to make her choose. So I kept showing up. I fixed things when they broke. I drove in Christmas traffic to dinners where you made me feel like a guest who'd crashed the wrong party. I paused. I'm not angry. I'm just done pretending I didn't hear it. Chelsea's eyes were bright. Not with tears, I don't think Chelsea cried easily, but with the sheer collision of pride, shame, and the deep discomfort of being seen clearly by someone she had underestimated for a decade. The 40 million, I said to Harold, because someone had to address it. I'll meet with Catherine's team Monday, not for you, for Megan, because it's her last name too. Harold Turner looked at me for a long moment. 61 years old. Silver hair. A man who'd built something real even if he'd let his wife narrate the story of everyone else's value. Something in his face shifted. It wasn't an apology. Maybe it never would be, but it was an acknowledgement. The kind that costs something. He nodded. Once, briefly, thank you, he said. It lacked warmth. But it wasn't nothing. I met with Catherine's team the following Monday. And Tuesday. And Thursday. Catherine was exactly what she'd seemed to be, on the side of Colorado Boulevard. Direct, fair, interested in how things actually functioned, rather than how they were presented. She asked me questions about the shop, about operations, about how I thought about managing people and resources at a small scale. I answered honestly. On Thursday afternoon, at the end of our third session, she leaned back in her chair in the conference room of the Moore Capital offices on 17th Street and looked at me for a moment. The Turner Group needs this deal, she said. The Meridian project has good bones. I've known Harold Turner for 20 years. He's made some good calls and some very bad ones. And right now he needs capital he hasn't been able to get elsewhere. She folded her hands. You understand that if I attach your name to this, it's a real responsibility. I understand, I said. I'm not doing this for Harold, she said. I want that clear. I know, I said. You made it clear on Saturday. She smiled slightly. You're not what your in-laws think you are. Most people aren't what their in-laws think they are, I said. She laughed, a real one, short and genuine. Fair point. The deal was signed 6 weeks later. $40 million. More capital group to the Turner Group. Structured equity stake, 5-year horizon. My name was on the liaison agreement. I wasn't an employee of either firm. I was an independent operational consultant, which meant a significant fee that I intended to put toward the 2 additional bays I'd been planning at the shop. Harold called me the evening the papers were signed. He asked me to dinner. I declined. Politely, Eric, Harold, I said. I'll work the deal. I'll do my job, and I'll do it well, because I told Catherine I would, and I keep my word. But we're not going to have a redemption dinner. We're not going to shake hands over good bourbon and call it square. I paused. Your wife spent 11 years making me feel like a stain on your family. She did it to my face, and she did it behind my back, and she did it in front of my son. I'm not carrying that anymore, but I'm also not forgiving it over a steak. He was quiet. You have a daughter who loves you, I said. Spend your energy there. That's the thing that still matters. I hung up. Megan was sitting at the kitchen table when I came back in, Trevor asleep uppercase, the house quiet the way it got on school nights. How'd he take it? She asked. Fine, I said. How are you doing with all of it? She thought about it for a moment. The way she always did. Megan never gave you the first answer if the first answer wasn't the real one. I'm angry at them, she said. I've been angry for years and I just kept swallowing it. Watching you swallow it. She looked at her hands. I'm glad you said what you said at dinner. I should have said it years ago. You were trying to keep the peace. There was no peace, she said. There was just me pretending there was. I sat down across from her. She called me, Megan said. Her mother. She said she wanted to talk. Do you want to? Megan was quiet for a long time. Not yet, she said finally. Maybe someday. But not yet. I understood that. I thought Chelsea might even understand it too, in the particular and unwelcome way people understand things when they've finally lost their leverage. Haley texted me 3 weeks after the dinner. Just for what it's worth, I always thought she was wrong about you. I'd replied, I know. Thanks, it wasn't nothing. The shop went to 8 bays by June. I hired a 5th mechanic, a 22-year-old kid named Marcus, who reminded me of myself at that age in the specific way that made me want to give him every advantage I hadn't had. I paid him a real wage and taught him to torque lug nuts properly, and told him that showing up mattered more than almost anything. He asked me once why I always stopped when I saw someone broken down on the road. Because I can, I said, and most people won't. He thought about that. Catherine Moore came by the shop in September with her Firebird for a routine tune-up, she said. Though I suspected the Firebird didn't really need one, and she was making a point in her particular quiet way. She watched me work for a while, drank the bad coffee I kept in the break room without complaining about it. You know what the Meridian Project is going to generate, she said, when I came back in to wash up. Over the 5 years. I've seen the projections, I said. Your consultancy fee is fixed, she said. I renegotiated the structure. You have an equity kicker now, small one, but real. I looked at her. You earned it, she said simply. Also, she set her coffee cup down. Harold Turner knows it. He signed it. I thought about Harold sitting at that birthday dinner. Silver hair, tight jaw, the controlled face of a man absorbing something he hadn't planned for. I thought about Chelsea in the car home, the 11 years of dinner parties and Thanksgivings and Christmas mornings, the wall she'd built, and the expression on her face when she understood it hadn't kept anything out. I thought about a 70-year-old woman in a burgundy Firebird on the side of Colorado Boulevard, and the particular arithmetic of stopping. Tell him I said thank you, I said. I didn't mean it warmly. I meant it the way you mean something when you've won, and you're still standing, and the other person knows it, and everyone in the room understands exactly what kind of thank you it is. The kind that closes a door. The kind that doesn't leave a gap for it to open again. Some walls, once they come down, don't get rebuilt. That's not forgiveness. That's just how the math works out. If you like this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories.